During the Second World War, the German Luftwaffe utilized a structured system of tactical markings and fuselage codes to organize and identify the thousands of aircraft that made up the day fighter force. Anyone who spent enough time building Luftwaffe models or watching World War II documentaries will recognize the various chevrons and bars that you see painted on the sides of Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s. But what do they mean? In this video, we're going to explore the organization of the Luftwaffe day fighter units from the wing level all the way down to the smallest squadron to help understand what those markings indicate and how they can tell us about the individual aircraft's place in the bigger picture of the Luftwaffe. So, with that said, let's jump right into it. So before we can talk about the fuselage codes on Luftwaffe fighters, we first have to understand the general organization of the force itself. To keep things focused today, we're just going to discuss the tactical structure of the Luftwaffe day fighters. The bombers and attack forces had their own nuances, and we'll save those for another day. At the tactical level, the fighter wing, or Jagdgeschwader, was the largest autonomous day fighter unit and was usually composed of roughly 160 aircraft, broken out into smaller organizational elements. This wing would be commanded by a Geschwaderkommandeur, or wing commander, that was usually a colonel, lieutenant colonel, or even sometimes a major. He would have command over the various subordinate units assembled out of those roughly 160 aircraft. Within the Jagdgeschwader, there were various fighter groups, or Gruppe, consisting of about 40 aircraft apiece. These were subordinated to the fighter wing, but had their own Gruppenkommandeur and command staff that answered to the Geschwaderkommandeur. These Gruppe would usually be stationed at adjacent airfields for easy management by the wing commander, though sometimes individual groups within a wing were spread out over multiple fronts as the war progressed. Within each Gruppe were usually 3 squadrons, or Staffel, commanded by a Staffelkapitän and made up of about a dozen aircraft. In each Jagdgeschwader, the wing commander had his own command flight, or Stabsschwarm, consisting of 4 officers, including the commander's adjutant, who was second in command, a chief operations officer, and a staff major who was responsible for maintaining the command company. Below that, each Gruppe had its own command flight of 4 officers, including the group commander, the adjutant, a technical officer responsible for maintenance of the group, and another staff officer. The Gruppe then had its own 3 squadrons of 12 fighters apiece. Each fighter wing usually had 3 or 4 Gruppe, though sometimes additional groups could be attached to the unit. These Gruppe were identified by Roman numerals. Staffel within the fighter wing were noted in Arabic numerals as needed, with Staffels 1, 2, and 3 subordinated to Group 1, 4, 5, and 6 subordinated to Group 2, and so on and so forth. Now that we've got that mapped out, we can move on to our first aircraft markings. We'll start with the wing commander's Stabsschwarm, or command flight. Now, like everything in life, the marking structure was supposed to follow a certain set of rules, but there was inevitably some variation across the fighter force. As such, wing commanders often had slight differences in the identifiers for their personal aircraft. The most common markings to denote the wing commander's aircraft included, in no particular order, a double chevron with a vertical bar, a double chevron with a horizontal trailing bar. An example of this was Johannes Steinhoff's mount when he was in charge of JG-77 in Italy. A single chevron with 2 horizontal trailing bars, one before and one after the national insignia. An example here includes Adolf Gallant's aircraft from his time as wing commander of JG-26. And finally, a horizontal arrow and a horizontal bar on either side of the national insignia. The wing commander's adjutant carried a single chevron and a vertical bar on his aircraft. The aircraft of the chief operations officer had a single chevron and a horizontal trailing bar. And the staff major had a single chevron and 2 vertical bars. Super easy stuff, right? Maybe not so much. If you do want to save this video for future reference, go ahead. It might be helpful. That way you can always come back and double check. Moving down to the Gruppe level, the group commander's aircraft would usually be adorned with a double chevron before the Balkenkreuz. Also important to note, some aircraft with double chevrons would have a second chevron stylized as a smaller triangle rather than the full chevron. His adjutant would have a single chevron, and the group's technical officer would have a single chevron, a vertical bar, and an open circle after the national insignia. Important to note, markings on all wing-level and Gruppe-level aircraft belonging to officers in the leadership roles would be painted in black with a white border or white with a black border, depending on the camouflage scheme. Now, to identify each group within a fighter wing, aircraft belonging to that Gruppe would have a special marking, or lack thereof, aft of the national insignia. In Group 1, there would be no extra symbol, just the Balkenkreuz. In Group 2, each aircraft would have a horizontal bar aft of the national insignia. Group 3 would either have a squiggle, as I call it, or a vertical bar. This differed between fighter wings. And finally, Group 4 would have either a dot, a smaller cross, or a half squiggle. This also varied between wings. I know that is a lot right up front, so let's take a second to practice what we've covered so far. Let's take a peek at this Bf-109 in the middle of this lineup. First, we see a single black chevron ahead of the Balkenkreuz, which tells us that this aircraft belongs to the group's adjutant. If we next look after the Balkenkreuz, we see no markings at all, which tells us that this is an aircraft belonging to the first group. So just like that, we can tell that this plane belongs to the adjutant of the first Gruppe. It's not bad, right? Let's try another one. Again, we see a single chevron up front here, so that tells us that we're looking at another adjutant's aircraft. But if we look after the Balkenkreuz, we've got a single horizontal bar, which tells us that this aircraft belongs to the second Gruppe. Therefore, this has to be the mount of the second group's adjutant. Wonderful. Now that we've got our Gruppe command flight markings worked out, let's get a little more granular and move down to the Staffel level. At the squadron or Staffel level, each Staffelkapitän would have his own aircraft denoted with a number 1. The remaining aircraft would thus be numbered 1 through 12 if the squadron had 12 aircraft, for example. Ship numbers were usually assigned in order of seniority and experience among the flyers within the Staffel. Within each Gruppe, a color code system would help identify the individual Staffel within the group. In Gruppe 1, Staffel 1, the Staffel commander would have a 1 on his aircraft, no extra symbols. In Staffel 2, the squad leader would either have a red 1 or a black 1, and no additional symbols. And in Staffel 3, he would have a yellow 1. If we move over to our second Gruppe, the fourth Staffel leader has a white 1 and a white horizontal trailing bar aft of the Balkenkreuz. As we previously learned, remember, a horizontal bar aft of the national insignia denotes second group. Staffel 5 will have a red or black number and a red or black horizontal bar. We're still within the second Gruppe, right? So the horizontal bar remains, but the color change denotes the Staffel. Accordingly, Staffel 6 has a yellow number and a yellow horizontal bar. We're starting to see the trend, right? The first Staffel within each group would wear white markings, the second would wear red or black markings, and the third would wear yellow markings. This pattern continues in the third and fourth Gruppe, with the first Staffel in each wearing white markings, the second wearing red or black markings, and the third wearing yellow. When combined, the color of the markings and the shape after the Balkenkreuz will tell you both which Staffel the aircraft you're looking at belongs to, as well as which Gruppe it is a part of. Okay, time for another little knowledge test to see how we're following along. We want to start from the top down, so to speak, identifying the biggest organizational unit we can first. So looking behind the Balkenkreuz, we see a black horizontal bar, which tells us second group. And then we see a black 12, which tells us fifth Staffel. So this was the number 12 aircraft assigned to the fifth Staffel, second group of whatever Jagdgeschwader this aircraft was assigned to. Let's do one more. This crash-landed 109 has a black squiggle behind the Balkenkreuz, which tells us that this bird belongs to third group. And looking forward to the black 10, that confirms that this aircraft was the number 10 aircraft assigned to 8th Staffel, 3rd Gruppe of its fighter wing. Now, interestingly enough, there wasn't a formalized system of identification at the highest tactical level of the Luftwaffe day fighters. There's no surefire way to identify which Jagdgeschwader a particular aircraft was assigned to. That said, each Jagdgeschwader, as well as sometimes each individual Gruppe and even Staffel, had their own emblem that sort of served as a visual mascot for the unit. There was no real rhyme or reason to the emblems assigned to each wing. Some were named after individuals, some were named after the fronts that they served in or an adopted honorary sponsor city, some were named after playing card suits. Some examples of notable emblems include JG-1 Oiso, named after 125 victory ace and late commander of the wing Walter Oiso. JG-2 Richthofen, after the Red Baron, World War I ace Manfred von Richthofen. JG-3 Udet, after 62 victory World War I ace and Luftwaffe procurement chief Ernst Udet. JG-7 Novotny, after 258 victory ace and late commander of the wing Walter Novotny. JG-26 Schlageter, after early party propaganda martyr Albert Leo Schlageter. The second Gruppe of JG-27's Berlin Bear, referencing the Berlin coat of arms and the adopted parent city of the unit.
JG-51 Mulders, after 115 Victory Ace and Inspector of Fighters Werner Mulders, late commander of the unit. The Winged Sword of JG-52. The Red Cross of 3rd Gruppe, JG-52. JG-53 Pick Ass, the Ace of Spades. JG-54 Grünherz, referring to the Green Heart of Thuringia, a state in central Germany. And JG-77 Ers As, the Ace of Hearts. And one last point to cover before we wrap this party up. Color bands. On a lot of Luftwaffe day fighters, especially in the mid to late war years, you see a wide, solid band of color wrapping around the fuselage somewhere between the Balkenkreuz and the leading edge of the vertical stabilizer. Prior to 1944, these bands were usually referred to as theater bands and were originally designed to help with quick air-to-air or ground-to-air friend or foe identification. Aircraft operating on the Western Front, Mediterranean, and Africa had solid white bands around the rear fuselage, while fighters operating in the Eastern Front usually had yellow bands. Incidentally, the yellow noses on many Luftwaffe fighters served the same IFF purpose. From 1944 onward, individual Jagdgeschwader were assigned dedicated Reich defense bands that were supposed to aid in both IFF and unit identification in the crowded and chaotic skies, as units from all over were called back to defend a besieged Germany in the final years of the war. Some examples are as follow. JG-1 was solid red. JG-2 was yellow with a white stripe down the middle. JG-3 was solid white. JG-7 was blue and red. JG-26 was black and white. JG-27 was green. JG-51 was green with a white stripe. JG-52 was red and white. JG-53 was solid black. JG-54 was blue. And JG-77 was white and green. Before we call it a day here, let's do one more little knowledge test to wrap it all up. Here's a shot Mrs. Bruce took of me at the Deutsche Museum in Munich this past summer. Right off the bat, we see a chevron and a horizontal bar ahead of the Balkenkreuz, and one horizontal bar after the Balkenkreuz, which tells us that this is the mount of a Geschwader Commodore. Up on the engine cowling, we recognize this as the emblem of JG-51. So we can tell that this particular 109 is in the markings of the fighter belonging to the wing commander of JG-51. Alright, one more and we'll call it. Let's take a look at this lovely Me-262. First, we check behind the Balkenkreuz and we see a vertical yellow bar. This tells us that we're looking at an aircraft of the 3rd group. And since our 5 is yellow, that confirms that this has to be a ship from the 9th Staffel. Sneaking up here to the nose, we can clearly see the emblem of JG-7 Novotny. And to confirm our assumption, we also see the matching blue and red defense band on the fuselage denoting JG-7.
Alright, so that is our crash course in Luftwaffe Dayfighter Tactical Markings. Hopefully you guys learned something today. I am always fascinated by this topic. If you do want to check out some more history and scale modeling content, you can do so right here. And until next time, my friends, be well, happy building. Cheers.